Day 259 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another quick update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. And as always, I'll start off with the Russian military losses as of the 9th of November 2022. So within the last 24-hour reporting period, there's also almost exactly 800 Russian military personnel losses. So almost sitting at the 78,000 mark there. Also, just in terms of Russian hardware losses, so armoured combat vehicles, an additional 12, tanks a whopping 15, and artillery 11 losses there as well. And before I move back to the map, also I'll just quickly give you a look at my own homegrown hobby of captured Russian hardware that's in working order. Something that I had to create myself, unfortunately, because it didn't exist anywhere online. And even just at a rough glance, you may notice that this amount of hardware is probably somewhat comparable to any mid-sized European country having this amount of military hardware. Would certainly give anyone a fairly formidable defensive stance. And then we'll move across back to the map, and today we'll start out in the Donbass region. So in the Svatove region, obviously fairly popular front line of sorts there at the moment. So if you watched this video yesterday, you'll know that the Ukrainian forces captured 21 Russian soldiers right here. And in fact, these Russian soldiers peacefully surrendered, basically due to really poor conditions that they were experiencing. And now there's even more stories. Reportedly, some Russian units attempted to abandon their positions at pretty much the same location due to receiving no ammo or food, but they were found and turned around at the Svatove region and sent back to the front line, probably without any additional food or ammunition, just like the first time. So this is, in fact, a pretty good example of what's wrong with Russia at the moment. Then we'll move down a little bit further to Bilorivka. Okay, so still Ukrainian held. Russia claimed that it did capture Bilorivka in the last day, but this hasn't been confirmed anywhere else yet. In fact, the opposite was confirmed about repelled Russian attacks in this region. And it's actually pretty common in this war for Russia to claim that they've captured a town when it just hasn't been the case. Now, this is to potentially increase the ridiculously low morale of the Russian troops. But just imagine what happens when the troops finally find out it was all just a lie. All morale gone. And then just nearby, there were some big explosions reported in Kramatorsk, which is the first time in a while. So Kramatorsk has been hit by hasn't been hit by the Russian forces ever since the Ukrainian forces actually liberated Lumen and Yampol around here, because this was previously the staging ground for Russia to perform attacks on both Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. As a result, more recently, Kramatorsk got a bit of a reprieve after all of that previous shelling. So not fantastic news to see this today. Then we'll move down a bit further, or not too far there as well, is Bakhmut. So Bakhmut still holds. And when you put all of this into perspective, it's quite interesting. So the second best army in the world, supposedly, cannot take one town for nearly 5 months of frontal assaults with 30,000 of their best soldiers. But if they ever took this single town, it actually would be recognized as a big success for Russia. And the Russian media outlets would be praising that win for months on end. But still, it hasn't happened. And then moving a further little bit down here, so just northeast of the city of Donetsk. So here it is, Vasinuvata. There was an electrical substation on fire here. And of course, this is the Russian-controlled village. And then even further down, certainly quite a few things happening in the last 24 hours in the Donbass. So Russian forces again tried to break through to Pavlivka. So Pavlivka right over there. but they were met with fierce artillery from the AFU. And then as a result, the Russian troops had to retreat, so they retreated, taking casualties along with it. Oh, and just lastly in this area, I'll just quickly mention a little bit odd. So satellite imagery has confirmed that Russia has been setting up some defensive lines just outside of Mariupol to the west. So there's a couple of little towns or outer suburbs. There we are, right, these ones here in Berdyansk in the middle. So setting up these defenses right here, and oddly, I might remark, as Russia seems to be really setting its expectations low, as they are, I suppose, potentially expecting a Ukrainian counteroffensive right at this location. And yet it's so far away from the front lines, probably as protected from the front line as any other place in this war. So, yeah, a little bit strange, that one. But maybe they're just knuckling down for winter. Then we'll move across to the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So this one right here that looks like a bit of a boomerang. So in both Dnipro City and Kryvyi Rih, Russian kamikaze drones were the culprit here. So no doubt attempting to destroy some energy infrastructure with these explosions. But all in all, 5 drones were shot down and another few made it through the Ukrainian air defense systems. And the ones that did hit seemed to strike a warehouse instead. Then we'll move across not too far to the occupied city of Melitopol in the Zaporizhia Oblast. So a Russian military headquarters base in this city right here was set on fire by Ukrainian partisans. And of course you'll find most of the partisan activity like this in this very region at the moment. And Russian troops stationed here constantly say how they have to keep looking over their shoulders. But imagine that, right? Invaded country, have to look over your shoulder. Oh, and also somewhere nearby here in Zaporizhia, a radar component for a Russian S-300 surface-to-air missile system was destroyed en route to the front lines. And when it was taken out, it was actually about 40 miles or about 60 kilometers from the front lines. It was unlikely from a HARM missile, which is normally designed for this radar component, because being that the radar was en route, the radar signal obviously wasn't emitting anything at the time. So instead it could have been from a drone or more Ukrainian partisan activity in the area. And my money is on the partisans for a region like this. We'll move across to the Kherson Oblast. So there was actually some explosions reported in just the last 15 minutes at the Novokakhovka area. Now, it's too soon to have pictures or really any specific information on this, but it's actually quite a common occurrence. Happens every few days. Typically for instance, from a HIMARS strike or an Excalibur shell, really high precision stuff from the Ukrainian side that takes out a headquarters, an ammo dump, you name it, it's taken out there all of the time. Possibly even the ability to use the road bridge for the Russian forces to really move back and forth between this bridge. And in what appears to be a good sign, Russian flags have disappeared from almost everywhere in Kherson. Not quite everywhere, but almost. And there's a lot of footage and photos to show that now. But more specifically, in terms of the front line, so it does look like there is some withdrawing happening. Now, in Miluve, and we also have Novokeri right here. So there is no more Russian military presence here, at least as advised by the locals in the region. Now, I might remind you, the map isn't up to date. They always say it's for OPSEC reasons. So even though it's showing as red for all of these areas, in fact, there isn't necessarily at all a Russian presence here any longer. And we just have to wait for the map to update. And also in similar news up here on the map, so at Snurivka, so up the top there, top of the mid-rift. Now, a Russian source on Snurivka has said that, and I quote, the units of the armed forces of Ukraine managed to gain a foothold on the northern outskirts of Snurivka. But also, in a fairly complimentary confirmation from the Ukrainian side, Ukrainian forces confirmed that they hit and inflicted significant damage on a big convoy of Russian forces heading south from Snivivka. So, sounds like they were withdrawing or running away or simply outmatched. And in very similar news, there was also some footage posted from checkpoints in the Chernobivka area. So this one's been talked about a lot. It did have a headquarters there once. It did have a used air base there from the Russian forces, all since withdrawn now, or in fact in some instances taken out, where there are no longer any Russian military occupying these checkpoints, which is pretty incredible considering how close it is to Kherson, the city of the Kherson Oblast. Oh, and in typical Russian withdrawal fashion, Russia has been blowing up multiple bridges and pontoon crossings in and around this whole region. Not the least of which was at the Derivka bridge and pontoon crossing that connects both the east and the west banks of the northern bank of the Dnieper River that would normally connect both sides of the Russian forces. So I've just got to ask, what are you doing, Russian forces? But I mean, well, probably retreating. And then we'll move across to some news. So actor Sean Penn met with Zelensky in Kyiv, and Sean Penn also left his Oscar award in Ukraine, and he said he would come back to collect it only after Ukraine's victory, as a symbol of belief about his confidence in Ukraine's upcoming victory. Now, it's not the first time that actor Sean Penn has been to town and come to Kyiv. So he came a few months ago to Kyiv in support of Ukraine again back then. And what did Russia do about this? Did they get their own celebrity to endorse the war? No. Well, actually, I believe they got Steven Seagal. But what they did do in direct response to this was personally sanction Sean Penn, which won't affect him in the slightest. Unless he takes a trip to the motherland, say to Moscow, then all bets would be off for Sean Penn. And in some other news, Russia said it is now ready to launch some peace talks with Ukraine, but launch these talks on the stipulation that there are no preliminary conditions, which is some classic Russian logic right there. Conditions specifying no conditions. What a way to dictate these peace talks. And in fact, this actually reminds me of Adolf Hitler just before World War II, saying, "Let's be friends to the world." Oh, isn't that sweet? But on a more serious note, Zelensky has responded to this multiple times now, reaffirming the only conditions for peace, including respecting Ukraine's sovereign borders, paying war reparations, and sending war criminals to justice, among many other things there. In fact, over the months, as Ukraine has become more and more advanced, militarily speaking, I've just noticed how Zelensky has become more and more confident with no room for movement any longer regarding negotiations. And in some other news, a member of Iran's National Security Council met with his Russian counterpart today and said that Iran welcomes and supports any initiative that can lead to a ceasefire and peace between Russia and Ukraine. And speaking with this political rhetoric, I would say which looks good so far moving forward. Because I see Iran more and more molding their language towards peaceful outcomes for this war. That, plus Iran is no longer the most sanctioned country on earth, that title now goes to Russia. And Iran will probably see this as a warning of things to come if they don't straighten up and fly right on the international stage. But only time will tell with these sorts of things. Oh, and in some really breaking news, the Russian-installed deputy head of Ukraine's Kherson region, named Kirill Stremisov, has died in a car crash. In the faraway Kherson and Zaporizhia bordering location of Henichesk. Now, this will no doubt be a blow for the Russian political regime, but it's not exactly clear yet the cause of the car crash, although I'm sure we're all open to speculation with this, as Russia has always been no stranger to silencing people. And in another Russian mobilization blunder, so in this video, a guy that was in Russia was picked up by the Russian police for being drunk, just walking along the street. So they took him back to the police station, then they proceeded to show him a bag of white powder, and they told him that he had two choices. Either one, go to the war in Ukraine for 3 months, or 2, go to prison for 4 years. Bit of a no-brainer choice there. And it's not clearly stated here, but obviously the crooked Russian cops showed the guy an illegal substance, maybe coke, and threatened him with possession if he didn't comply. So this poor guy said that he was scared, so he chose Ukraine. But now, after all that, he is a prisoner of war living in Ukraine, getting fed 3 meals a day and a warm bed in the evening. Better than being on the front line. But you know what? For stories like these, the joke is on everyone anyway, because Russia has since mandated, I think it was no more than 6-7 days ago, that prisoners and parolees are getting drafted for the war in Ukraine anyway, to fill those frontline quotas. So basically, now everybody gets to go to war. And then just very lastly, a super quick funny to round off the day with, guys. So are you a Russian conscript that doesn't want to be cannon fodder in Ukraine? Is the war getting you down? Well, worry no more, because there is a small concert bus that will come to your staging location just before you get shipped off to the front lines of the war to lift those spirits. All your problems have now been solved, Soviet style. Not a lot of guys really getting into the mix of things here. So that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, hit that like button, subscribe. If you find that you're watching the videos, I'm noticing a lot of people are watching, but they're not necessarily subscribed there. So if you've noticed that you watch a few of these videos a week, yeah, certainly hit that subscribe button. You'll keep updated. I'm not a spammer by any means, but yeah, no, I do appreciate that if you were to. And ignore all of the trolls in the comments, like I always say. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.